Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We're performing an intellectual excavation, really. We're
Hmm.
taking a document that, it starts like a very quiet, genteel domestic novel, but it spirals very quickly into a detailed and, frankly, shocking murder procedural.
It really does.
We are diving deep into the investigation that just ripped apart the foundations of polite 19th century society at a place called Mansfield Park.
It's a remarkable piece of work because it blends these genres so perfectly. I mean, you have to imagine the world of, say, Jane Austen, the meticulously observed drawing rooms, the calculating marriage proposals, the obsession with social consequence.
Right.
And then into that world, you introduce the cold, hard logic of, well, basically a Scotland Yard detective
And the subject is the absolutely tragic and shocking fate of Fanny Price.
who, by the time she was murdered, was actually married, so she was known as Mrs. Crawford.
Okay, so let's unpack this intricate mess. We have sources that detail the family history, the victim's enormous and very complicated fortune, the social chaos caused by these two charismatic outsiders, and then finally, the rigorous and, I'd say, often brutal work of the detective who's hired to solve the case.
Right.
Our mission today is to navigate this treacherous, emotional, and I think financial landscape, to trace how ambition and this obsessive need to keep up appearances just laid the groundwork for homicide.
And for you, the listener, this is so much more than just a crime story. It's
Yeah.
really a masterclass in reading between the lines of respectability. We're going to show how the structural economic desperation of the era, that relentless need to secure status and wealth through marriage, wasn't just inconvenient, it was utterly corrosive.
Yeah.
Capable of pushing seemingly dutiful individuals to commit the absolute gravest acts. The pressure of seeming respectable is, I think, the ultimate antagonist here.
So to even begin to understand the murder, we have to establish the staggering financial and social stakes that this woman, Fanny Price, represented.
Absolutely.
This is less a family gathering and more like a corporate merger waiting to happen, with the Bertram family right at the center.
It all begins with the three Miss Wards. They're the sisters who established all the core connections for this story.
Right.
The middle sister, she marries Sir Thomas Bertram and becomes Lady Bertram, the mistress of Mansfield Park. That's the social center of the drama.
And the eldest sister is a name we're going to hear a
Oh,
lot.
yes. She's critically important. She married a Mr. Norris and gained what the sources call a considerable fortune and a spacious house. She becomes the formidable Mrs. Norris.
A woman obsessed with management and economy.
To put it mildly. And then there's the youngest, Miss Frances. Her fate is what really sets the tragedy in motion. She married a Mr. Price, who was the only son of a great Cumberland family, and that connection carried a prodigious fortune. We're talking vast West Indies property and the huge estate of Lessingby Hall.
Sounds like a great match.
Well, for a woman of the gentry, it was considered an unsuitable connection.
Why?
Because her birth was considered low, so she was held cheap by Mr. Price's very proud family. She died young. And her husband, Mr. Price, he then left for the West Indies.
Leaving their daughter behind.
Exactly. Their orphan daughter, Fanny, who was then raised by his parents, it was a painful separation for her, but it did guarantee her eventual inheritance.
So when Fanny Price, our eventual victim, is brought to Mansfield Park, she's initially treated like a poor relation, right? A dependent niece.
That's how it looks on the surface.
But the reality is radically different. And this, I think, is the core misunderstanding that eventually just explodes.
That's exactly right. Fanny is, in fact, an incredible heiress. Upon coming of age, she would possess not only the title to Lessingby Hall and those West Indies estates, which are massive sources of wealth,
Right.
but also a personal liquid fortune of at least £40,000.
Wow. Okay, we really need to pause on that figure, £40,000. In this period, an income of, $2,000 a year was considered comfortable independence.
Right.
Fanny's capital fortune alone, even if you invest it conservatively, would generate an immense income. The sources explicitly state her fortune greatly exceeds that of her Bertram cousins.
It does.
She is the financial prize of the entire neighborhood.
And it instantly transforms her status, even if she maintains this, demure, modest appearance that's expected of her. She moves from being an obligation to being the absolute essential piece on this social chessboard.
And who is the first person to spot this opportunity and, I guess, try to corner the market?
Mrs. Norris, of course.
Of course. Mrs. Norris, the great believer in assiduous economy and frugality. But that sounds terribly dull. I have to wonder, does her tightly controlled nature hide something deeper than just thrift?
That's a brilliant point.
I mean, is she simply trying to be economical? Or is she already in some kind of financial distress that makes her obsessed with securing Fanny's money?
And that's something the investigation later confirms. You're spot on. Mrs. Norris's frugality is not moral virtue. It's a cover for profound financial anxiety and potentially ruinous debt.
So she's desperate.
Desperately seeking security, and she immediately projects a match between Fanny and her stepson, Edmund Norris, who would inherit Mr. Norris's property.
Okay, wait, let's clarify that distinction because it's a structural one. Edmund Norris is her stepson.
Yes.
A Norris, not a Bertram. So this isn't just a match to help the Bertrams. This is Mrs. Norris ensuring the Price fortune anchors her legacy in her family line. It's about reinforcing her own social standing, which she clearly feels is precarious.
Exactly. It's a calculated financial merger designed entirely by Mrs. Norris. She ceaselessly reminds Fanny that she is an heiress and must maintain a modest appearance despite this, effectively controlling her while also leveraging her wealth.
And Sir Thomas, for his part, favors the match. He sees it as unquestionably advantageous for the family's stability.
He does.
And into this perfectly calculated financial atmosphere steps, well, a wrecking ball.
The Crawford siblings.
Yes.
Sir Thomas invites Henry Crawford, who's known as an improver or a landscape architect, and his sister, Mary, to Mansfield for 3 months. Their arrival is meant to provide a distraction after his eldest son, Tom, departs.
Henry Crawford, who, let's be honest, is a mercenary bachelor masquerading as a gentleman.
Oh, accelerate.
He sets his sights instantly. The sources tell us that when he's asked about his romantic prospects, he needs a fortune of at least £20,000. I cannot exert myself for anything less.
And Fanny's 40,000 plus massive property.
Irresistible.
He's the ultimate chaos agent, and he's driven purely by capital.
Yeah.
His sister, Mary Crawford, though, she's equally sharp and immediately starts judging the current power structure. She sees Edmund Norris, Fanny's presumed fiancé, as an arrogant, weak young man driven by motives of selfishness and worldly ambition.
That's a pretty profound social critique, isn't it? Disguised as a, drawing room observation.
It is. But she doesn't spare Fanny either.
No.
Mary finds Fanny vain, insincere, and possessed of a quite excessive degree of self-consequence, despite her studied appearance of modest self-denial.
So this suggests that Fanny, even though she becomes the victim, was not entirely innocent of the pride that wealth can breed.
It seems so, and it creates this critical tension. The Bertram daughter, Maria, who is beautiful and accomplished, is noted to possess this intense resentment because Fanny's superior fortune has placed Maria in a second place in everything to Miss Price.
The wealth has just warped every single social interaction.
Yeah.
It's turned family dynamics into a fierce competition for recognition and consequence.
Exactly.
So with the stage perfectly set by financial pressure and this intense rivalry, the whole situation is about to be destabilized even further by 2 factors: new romantic interests and a catastrophic breach of decorum.
First, we have the arrival of a Mr. Rushworth. He's a wealthy but rather vacuous young man, the younger son of a lord, and he brings with him an estate yielding about £4,000 to £5,000 a year.
And he's initially courting Miss Bertram.
He is. But Mary Crawford, ever the keen observer, notices that Rushworth's eye is drawn more often to Maria than to Fanny.
And this hits Fanny hard. Why is this small slight so important?
It's important because Fanny, despite her outward modesty, has become utterly accustomed to constant deference and an easy preeminence because of her fortune. Rushworth's slight to her pride, even if it's minor, is a sign that the guaranteed deference of the gentry class might be eroding. Her wealth gives her consequence, but her lack of established social connection means she still has to compete.
And at the same time, the intended match between Edmund and Fanny starts to fray.
Entirely due to Mary Crawford's influence. Edmund, surprisingly, is drawn to Mary, and he starts teaching her to ride.
And this riding lesson becomes a crucial turning point.
It does. Mary starts to see beyond Edmund's initial stiffness. She realizes his coldness was just shyness, and she finds herself unexpectedly susceptible to his placidity and steadiness.
She realizes, to her own shock, that she's falling in love with the man who is supposed to marry the heiress.
Exactly.
And the competitive spirit just erupts in the most genteel way possible. Fanny Price, realizing the danger, becomes intimately acquainted with Mary.
But only to communicate her own far superior claims on Edmund and teach Mary to avoid him.
That is passive aggression at a championship level.
It is subtle psychological warfare, and it's executed entirely under the guise of female friendship and confidence.
Yeah. It shows Fanny, despite her delicate appearance, is a ruthless combatant in this social sphere. She's fully leveraging her financial position. And now we get to the scandal that truly foreshadows the family's unraveling, the amateur theatricals.
Right. Mr. Rushworth builds a private theater at his estate, Southerton, but the family decides to stage a play, Lover's Vows, in the Mansfield billiard room.
The choice of Lover's Vows is central to the scandal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a play that is just rife with social and sexual transgression. Its casting creates massive tension. Edmund, who is training to be a clergyman, is pressed into the role of Anne Holt,
And Mary Crawford is cast opposite him as Amelia.
which is the source of the horror for Mary. The great impropriety comes when she reads the script. Her character has to make a near declaration of love to Anne Holt, played by Edmund, and the scene culminates in a description of a marriage of love.
So it's forced public intimacy.
Yes, it crosses a boundary that 19th century propriety could just not tolerate, especially involving a clergyman.
And Edmund opposes the whole thing.
He does. He firmly opposes the entire project on grounds of propriety, realizing the damage it will do to his reputation and, more importantly, to the family's moral standing. But his objections fail.
Why?
Because the family, driven by self-gratification and just the sheer desire for distraction and entertainment, prioritizes their fleeting pleasure over duty and moral law. This is the first major structural failure of the family unit.
And while this dramatic tension is reaching its peak, a small, seemingly insignificant event reveals the depth of Mrs. Norris's manipulation.
The necklace incident.
At the Southerton Ball.
This is a classic example of a seemingly trivial detail that holds massive consequence. Mrs. Norris publicly accuses Mary of stealing Fanny's necklace, claiming it's worth at least 18 shillings.
And she's using this public accusation to discredit Mary, who she sees as the threat to her financial plans.
Exactly. But the truth, as Henry Crawford reveals later, is far more insidious.
Oh.
The necklace was originally Edmund's gift to Fanny. When Mrs. Norris realized Mary and Edmund were becoming close, she intercepted the necklace, presented Mary with an inferior copy, and then lied to Edmund, claiming Mary's was the fake.
So Henry realizes Mrs. Norris is practicing active, desperate deceit to secure the Fanny-Edmund marriage.
He does. He believes Fanny must have given the original gift away because she no longer cared for Edmund. But it shows how deeply Mrs. Norris is invested in manipulating every single event to secure that fortune, and how far she's willing to sink to preserve her own precarious position.
The social pressure cooker finally hits full pressure when Sir Thomas, who's been delayed by a serious illness in Cumberland, sends an urgent message. He wishes the marriage between Edmund and Fanny to proceed immediately for his peace of mind. The window for maneuver is closing fast.
It is.
The family is now anticipating this frantic, rushed wedding between Edmund and Fanny, all driven by Sir Thomas's urgent need for stability. But the sources reveal a dramatic, disruptive, and completely unexpected outcome to this entire pressurized situation.
A bombshell. Fanny Price and Henry Crawford had eloped and married in London just 4 days after Fanny came of age.
Which means she secured control over her £40,000 fortune and immediately wed the man she wanted, completely circumventing Mrs. Norris and the Bertram's plans.
This alone would be the scandal of the century. But the mystery deepens immediately.
Because Henry Crawford returns to the neighborhood alone.
Yes, frantically searching for his new wife, Fanny, now Mrs. Crawford. She had disappeared from their London lodgings little more than a week after their wedding.
And Henry confesses to his sister Mary that they had argued bitterly, probably about money or his reputation, and he left for Enfield to find peace and solitude and prepare himself to face the family.
Right, and the critical timeline here is the gap. There's a week between Fanny's disappearance and Henry's return, and then the fact that Henry waited 2 full days in Enfield before coming back to Mansfield Park to report her disappearance.
That delay is immediately suspicious, isn't it? A week for a new bride to vanish, and the husband delays reporting it.
Highly suspicious.
But Mary, whose heart is still with Edmund, is at Mansfield Park when the family, still operating on that urgent letter from Sir Thomas, is preparing for the wedding that will never happen.
It's during this confused period that the physical evidence of the tragedy emerges.
Yes. Mary, Edmund, and the steward, Mr. McGregor, are walking the park. specifically viewing the site of Henry Crawford's so-called improvements, a newly cut channel for a cascade.
And this detail is so chilling. The place of the murder is the very place Henry, the man of ambition and disruption, had chosen to alter the landscape.
And there, in the muck and the new earth, Mary sees what she initially thinks is just a dirty bundle of clothes.
But it quickly resolves into the true nature of what lay before her, Fanny's decomposing body.
The horror of that discovery must have been profound.
It is, and this is where Mary, a gentlewoman, must instantly become a forensic witness. Her initial observations are vital, and they immediately contradict Henry Crawford's timeline.
How so? What does she notice?
Mary notes that the body's decomposition suggests it had not been there for the full 16 days of Fanny's absence.
That's a crucial detail.
It is. It means she was killed after Henry claimed to have left her in London and potentially much closer to Mansfield Park than anyone initially suspected.
So the murderer must have brought her body back or killed her locally.
Exactly. And the clothing speaks volumes about her final moments. She was dressed expensively. A fur-trimmed pelisse, a white muslin gown, and fine leather boots.
So this indicates she was dressing to meet someone important, someone of quality.
Right. Probably in the park itself or at a nearby location. She wasn't running away in desperation. She was keeping an appointment. This rules out simple vagrancy or accidental death. The victim was intentionally lured.
And the physical evidence of the attack itself.
Mary notes distinct wounds on the left side, caused by a thicker and heavier object than a knife. Something like a hammer, or more specifically, a mattock with a pointed edge.
Wow.
She also noted defensive wounds on the hands, suggesting a struggle, and the clothing showed signs of her falling forward onto her knees. This implies the initial blow knocked her down rather than killing her instantly.
And the missing items. No wedding ring and no purse. This complicates the motive right away. Is it a crime of passion or robbery, or is it directly related to the marriage?
Precisely. And to solve this, the Bertrams turned to outside help. Despite Edmund's intense objections, he calls them little more than criminals, whose methods rely on bribery, violence, and extortion.
Tom Bertram sends for Charles Maddox,
A reputable thief-taker and former Bow Street runner from London.
The genteel world of Mansfield Park must now deal with the brutal reality of 19th century professional policing.
Yes.
The moment Charles Maddox arrives, the atmosphere at Mansfield Park just changes fundamentally. He's not a gentleman amateur, like in a typical novel.
No.
He's a professional law enforcer who operates outside the niceties of high society.
And Maddox represents the cold application of force and logic against the gentry's expectation of privacy and deference. Edmund's earlier objections to his methods, the use of intimidation, maybe even violence, certainly blackmail, that's a key insight into how the upper class viewed the necessary evil of professional law enforcement.
He's there to get results, not to respect their feelings. And Maddox immediately compels Mary Crawford to repeat her forensic testimony. Why is that necessary? She's already told the family.
He needs to confirm the details without the filtering of polite society. So she confirms the expensive clothing, the heavy pointed wound, and that critical decomposition timeline, that Fanny had been dead for less than the 16 days of her reported absence.
And this solidifies his primary working theory. The killer is local, and the crime was premeditated, or at least involved the calculated disposal of the body locally.
Right.
But before Maddox can fully focus on the interviews, the tragedy takes another physical toll on the family.
Julia Bertram,
who had always loved the old park. She's found chained to one of the ancient oak trees and the avenue trees that were slated for Henry Crawford's improvements and due to be felled soon.
It's a desperate, tragic act that just signals her profound mental distress. She collapses shortly afterward, falling gravely ill with a fever, breathing difficulties, a rash. She descends into this terrifying torpor.
And Maddox, in his calculating way, immediately suspects she may have been a witness to something.
Yes, that her mental break and her desperate attempt to save the trees coincide too closely with the time of the murder.
So Maddox clearly sees a psychological link between the changes being made to the park and the violence that occurred there.
Absolutely. The victim was found near the channel being cut for Henry's aesthetic improvements. The murder weapon, we later learn, is a mattock, a workman's tool used for these very improvements. The park, this place of pastoral beauty, has been violently corrupted by the ambition of its inhabitants.
So now Maddox begins his interrogation, and he focuses on the family's whereabouts on the morning Fanny was killed. He has two main suspects, both intensely motivated by resentment and fortune.
First up, Edmund Norris.
Right.
Edmund admits he returned from Cumberland earlier than his mother, Mrs. Norris, knew. He walked 3 miles into the park alone that morning.
And Maddox pounces. He stresses the obvious. Edmund had good cause for resentment.
He lost Fanny's fortune, he was publicly jilted by his intended bride, and his mother's careful financial planning was completely ruined. Maddox suggests Edmund's arrival timeline defies belief unless he was meeting Fanny, perhaps to plead with her, or perhaps to confront her.
The irony here is excruciating for Mary.
It is. Her terror mounts because she knows Edmund's story makes him look intensely guilty. But she believes the truth of his early return and his distracted state is entirely due to his secret, conflicted love for her, which he was struggling with on the journey.
But Maddox doesn't deal in nuanced emotions.
No, he deals in motive and opportunity, and Edmund has both.
Then there is Henry Crawford, the wealthy widower.
Maddox aggressively questions his 2-day delay at an empty house in Enfield, the same house where Henry had previously stayed after a death, that of his housekeeper, and was examined by constables.
So Maddox links Henry's previous association with death with his ample motive. Fanny's disappearance suggested the marriage was already in trouble, and he may have killed her to retain control of her fortune.
And his utter lack of a solid alibi for the time she was killed near Mansfield. He concludes Henry is the prime suspect.
And Henry's defense is almost non-existent.
He just tells Mary, Maddox has his motive. I cannot prove I was not here in Mansfield when she arrived. I cannot prove I did not kill her.
The brilliance of Maddox's method is that he has successfully cornered the two most visible men in Fanny's life. One motivated by shattered duty and loss of consequence, the other by simple greed and thwarted possession.
And he's made both of them incapable of proving their innocence. He is operating solely on maximizing social pressure until someone breaks.
But Maddox continues to cast a wide net. He doesn't just rely on the obvious suspects. He turns his harsh, intimidating focus onto Maria, Bertram, Tom's sister, suspecting she's hiding something about the time of the murder.
And he discovers Maria lied about staying in her room that morning. So he employs his trademark extortion by forcing her maid, Kitty, to confess to the lie via intimidation.
So he uses Kitty's low social status and her fear to break Maria's defenses, forcing her to speak the truth.
And Maria finally offers a partial confession. She admits leaving her room and encountering Fanny near the channel. And it seems Fanny, emboldened by her new marriage and vast fortune, used the confrontation to needle Maria.
How so?
Maria says Fanny was arrogant and imperious, boasting of her triumph and then insulting Maria, claiming no one would have missed Maria if she had eloped, nor would anyone have married her for her, well, inferior fortune.
That's pure, unadulterated class and money rivalry.
It is. And in a freak of temper, Maria struck Fanny across the face. Fanny fell to her knees, screaming. Maria was appalled by her own violence and ran away, believing the blow was severe, but certainly not fatal.
This confession explains the bruising and Fanny's posture when she was found, but Maddox is quick to absolve Maria of the murder itself.
Right. He points out a subtle but critical forensic detail. Maria is left-handed. The murder weapon, the Maddox later recovered from the workman's cart, bearing brain matter, was wielded right-handed.
So Maria is cleared. But the incident demonstrates the intense emotional volatility of the women in the house, simmering just beneath the surface of propriety.
Exactly.
And now we arrive at the most heartbreaking moment of miscommunication and moral sacrifice in this whole story.
Yes. Mary visits Edmund, who is confined at the White House under guard, believing him to be guilty because of his weak alibi.
She's heartbroken, dedicated to protecting the man she loves, even if he is a killer.
So she tells Edmund she knows the truth, cannot let Henry be falsely accused, and must go to Maddox. She has misinterpreted a feverish whisper from the dying Julia, who named Edmund.
Wait, so Mary believes Julia saw Edmund kill Fanny.
That's the implication Mary draws from Julia's delirium.
Yeah.
But Edmund, hearing Mary say she knows the truth and must go to Maddox, believes Mary is confessing her own guilt.
Oh no.
Perhaps believing she struck Fanny to protect Henry, or maybe just to stop the marriage that was causing her pain.
This is a devastating moment of moral calculus.
It is. Edmund, driven by his defining characteristic of duty and his secret, intense love for Mary, immediately confesses to Maddox that he alone killed Fanny.
He sacrifices his life, reputation, and future to save the woman he loves, who he believes is confessing to him.
It's the ultimate sacrificial move, designed to protect Mary from the shame and the gallows. Henry later realizes this entire catastrophic confession was based on Mary's ambiguous wording, leading Edmund to believe she was the killer.
But the relentless Maddox, who understands the depths of human deception, still has one loose end: Julia Bertram's worsening condition. The fever has become unbearable.
Maddox, still suspecting Julia saw something, joins the apothecary, a Mr. Phillips, to examine her remedies. This is where the true horror of a calculated killer as opposed to a passionate one is revealed.
What do you find?
Maddox concludes Julia was deliberately poisoned. He finds traces of laudanum in Gilbert's cordial, a substance meant to soothe, not kill. The contamination was calculated and deliberate.
This is a game changer.
It is, because it means the killer is not some hot-tempered man who struck out in a moment of passion. It's a cold, clinical individual already in the house with unquestioned access to the sick room.
The motive has shifted from simply securing a fortune to eliminating a witness.
And Edmund's confession about killing Fanny must be false, because he was confined and had no knowledge of, let alone access to, the poison that was used on Julia.
So Maddox charges Mr. Phillips and Mary with absolute secrecy, knowing the killer is still roaming the house and must be forced into the open.
Yes.
The narrative shifts now from a mystery of passion to a full-blown psychological thriller. Maddox sets a deliberate trap.
He does. He lets it be known that Edmund, the false confessor, will be moved soon. This is designed to force the true killer to act against the only person left who is capable of exposing them.
And the killer takes the bait.
They do. Mary, visiting Edmund the bait, finds him slumped over a table in a terrifying torpor. He has been poisoned with laudanum, the same substance that killed Julia. The calculated killer has returned to eliminate the original suspect.
And at that moment, the door opens, and the horrifying, almost unbelievable truth walks in.
Mrs. Norris enters the room. And the entire narrative that she is the dutiful, frugal, and respectable sister it evaporates. She confesses to murdering both Fanny and Julia.
Mrs. Norris, the woman who lectured everyone on propriety, economy, and the necessity of good marriages. What twisted logic, what root cause could possibly have driven this matriarch into the role of a desperate, violent murderer?
The motive was twofold: financial collapse and wounded pride, which were magnified by Fanny's careless cruelty.
Tell me more.
Fanny's marriage and a subsequent letter she wrote to Mrs. Norris exposed Mrs. Norris's financial desperation. All her scrimping and penny pinching was a sham to cover massive, ruinous debt.
So the economy wasn't virtue, it was fraud. And Fanny's inheritance was her only solution.
Precisely, and the letter was the final insult. Fanny, now in control of her fortune, was boastful of her triumph over the Bertram's plans and, most critically, cruelly offered Mrs. Norris miserable shillings.
A devastating insult to a woman whose pride was her only remaining currency. So the attack on Fanny, then, was an explosion of economic fury and emotional resentment.
It was an impulsive freak of temper when Fanny boasted of escaping Edmund and Mrs. Norris and then made that miserable shillings offer. Mrs. Norris struck her. But then, realizing the blow might not be fatal, and knowing Fanny would expose her debt and financial ruin if she lived, she had to ensure her silence.
So she used the workman's mattock, the very tool of the park improvements, to deliver the fatal blow.
Yes, and the missing purse is also explained. Mrs. Norris, desperate, stole it from the dying woman.
And Julia, the poor, sensitive witness, what about her?
Julia had witnessed something. Mrs. Norris later admits she didn't know what exactly, but she could not risk Julia recovering and killing me.
So the second murder was purely calculated.
Purely. After the apothecary assured the family Julia might recover, Mrs. Norris tampered with the cordial, using the laudanum to silence the only witness to her debt and her violence.
But Mary's quick thinking and Maddox's presence saves Edmund from the final poisoning.
Right. Maddox enters and overpowers Mrs. Norris, who, in a chilling final attempt to save the family's honor, is declared to have quite lost her reason and is confined to a private asylum.
Sir Thomas, always prioritizing appearance, refuses a public asylum.
Of course.
But Maddox, before he departs, clarifies the confession fiasco. He admits he was certain Henry was the killer.
But he knew Edmund's confession was false because Edmund did not know Julia had been poisoned. The first confession was one of duty. The second murder proved the killer's true identity.
So now that the blood is washed away, the final choice remains for Mary Crawford.
Yes.
Maddox, the shrewd investigator, actually proposes marriage to her. He argues that their compatibility, intellect, similar disposition, and the freedom and independency he offers will suit her best, even acknowledging her love for Edmund.
It's Mary's moment of profound choice. Prudence, stability, and intellectual freedom with Maddox, or scandal and duty with Edmund.
She rejects Maddox.
She does. She seeks out Edmund, who explains why he had a duty to break his previous engagement to Fanny.
Why? What does he say?
He says he could not enter a marriage without the true affection that alone can justify any hope of lasting happiness. He was committed to Fanny only until he realized his true feelings for Mary.
So it was a moral stand against convenience, even if it meant financial ruin and social censure.
And this act of moral honesty, despite the scandal, reaffirms Mary's love.
So she chooses love and duty with Edmund, despite his now reduced circumstances. And the final, great, almost absurd irony.
Henry Crawford, now a wealthy widower thanks to Fanny's fortune, insists he will use Fanny's money to support Mary and Edmund. He purchases a small house for them on the Lessingby estate.
The wealth that caused the murder now flows back to protect the survivors.
Incredible, isn't it?
We began this deep dive by charting a course through the intricate social rules of high society, following the logic of a world where financial success dictates moral behavior. What we discovered is that beneath the surface of drawing room manners, the rules of murder were equally cold, calculated, and driven by, well, base economic motive.
And the investigation showed that Mrs. Norris, the great architect of propriety and aggressive economy, was the murderer. She was driven not by spontaneous rage, but by the shame and potential exposure of her financial ruin and her profound desire to preserve her standing.
And the crime was solved by exploiting these very social dynamics. Edmund's false confession of duty and the killer's calculated access to the sick room. Mary Crawford's ultimate rejection of Maddox and her choice of Edmund signifies a move away from the obsession with consequence and towards a genuine connection, despite the social cost. It suggests a rejection of the idea that life must always be dictated by the most advantageous financial match.
And perhaps most fascinatingly, she resolves to occupy herself by writing, taking intellectual independence, choosing to earn her own bread rather than relying solely on the fractured fortunes of others. She's moving beyond the constraints of the system that killed Fanny.
This whole tragic affair stemmed from a fixation on fortune and appearance. The £40,000, the Lessingby Hall estate, the relentless effort to maintain the illusion of success. If the wealth and consequence had been less, would the impulse for violence have been so great?
I think we saw that the fear of financial failure, coupled with the desperate need to maintain a respectable facade, proved to be a motive powerful enough to compel the most outwardly dutiful person to commit calculated, heinous crimes. It forces us to ask, how much of our own behavior is still dictated not by genuine morality, but by the relentless effort to keep up appearances, avoid the scandal of exposure, and maintain the illusion of control in a financially unpredictable world?
A deeply unsettling thought, and one that echoes far beyond the gates of Mansfield Park. Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with more insights gleaned from the sources you share.